Hello, my name is Dr. Lourenço Garcia, and I am the Assistant Superintendent of Revere Public Schools. I'll be the moderator for today's panel discussion on Juneteenth. This year's Juneteenth holiday is on Sunday, June 19th. This holiday is known to some as America's second Independence Day. Despite being the oldest holiday in the United States, it was not until last year, June 17, 2021, that President Biden signed it into law, making it a federal holiday. In fact, Juneteenth is the first holiday to be approved since Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was established in 1983. This recognition was not without controversy, though. It came more than 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which suggests that enslaved people were only free on paper until 1865. The road to freedom was not a straight line. Black people had to fight for freedom and racial justice under difficult conditions. From Emancipation Proclamation to Juneteenth to the Civil Rights Movement, many African Americans suffered or sacrificed their lives to pave the way for our freedom. Join me this afternoon are our 10 distinguished panelists: Dr. Percy Napier, Principal of Garfield Elementary School; Dr. Stacey Mulligan, Seacoast Principal; Dr. Maritsa Barros, Chief of Talent and Culture for the City of Revere; Jason Torrey, High School Science Teacher for middle school and high school students; Leena, Hana, Jaleeyah, who will spend 45 minutes with us, sharing their perspectives on the historical significance of Juneteenth, not only for African Americans, but also for others who, one way or the other, have experienced the impact of racism, discrimination, and oppression at some point in their lifetime. So the first question I have is, what's the significance of Juneteenth?
I think Juneteenth is significant because it marks a point in our country's history where we transition from treating people as chattel, at least, to at least recognizing the basic humanity of African Americans. So, I mean, it may sound simple, but it is a major turning point in our country's history, especially after 200 years of slavery. And I think it also is significant because, you know, our country doesn't really acknowledge the fact that this was a slave nation. And I think the fact that we have some official acknowledgement of it is probably like the first time that we actually recognize the fact that slavery was a very, very endemic part of this country's history from the very, very beginning. So I think, and just those two areas, I think that's where some of the significance lies as well.
Thank you, Dr. Napier. Anybody else?
I'd like to add, I think the significance, in addition to what you named, include, it represents Freedom Day, right? It's about being free, but the significance of how many individuals didn't know of this freedom, that's pretty significant as well, because to me it reflects so much of the untold truths and history of our nation. And for me, the fact that we've established it now as a federal holiday lets me know that we might be ready to live and stand in our truth and work towards progress with this recognition. So that freedom makes me wonder, we are free, how many of us know it and act in that freedom?
Thanks for that. Anybody else would like to build on that?
So I feel like, in a way, this is a great holiday that has been introduced by Biden, but I feel like, yes, it is the start of a new era, but there's still many issues that are persisting in the world, like the corrupt justice system, that does need to be addressed. So yes, this needs to be put out, but I feel like, in a way, it's still the issues in the world, like in our country too, are still not being addressed, like now. That was it.
Thank you. That's certainly a very good perspective. All right, we're going to go to question 2. Juneteenth was the first celebrated in 1865, but it did not become a federal holiday until June 17, 2021. Why there is? Why so many years have passed and only now it's becoming a federal holiday? There's a gap of probably centuries, over, I would say close to 2 centuries. Why is that? Anybody would like to jump in it and try to answer that question?
It's a pretty heavy question, Doc. That's a pretty
It is.
heavy question,
It is.
if we're being honest.
Yeah.
I think that observing federal holidays is something that is critically important in talking about this American life. And we mentioned that it was the first holiday to be recognized since Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was established in 1983. Now, we can look at the timeline and see how long it took to recognize a great person.
Right.
And then we can talk about how long it's taken us to kind of acknowledge some truths about the American story and what that is and what that looks like and how all of us are represented in this story. So having these types of discussion, particularly around racialized issues, is, I think, something we've seen previously, and we have to continue to have these conversations. And again, celebrate holidays like this one so we can recognize that, until all of us are free, none of us are free.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a very good perspective. And also, one could make an argument that certainly this gap has to do with who's narrating the story, whose perspectives are being valued and appreciated. And, obviously, we can see that not only in our society, but also even in our schools, our textbooks, materials, curriculum, and so on and so forth. Juneteenth, I don't think, has been taught in our schools. So certainly there's a lot of gap there. So that could be a reason behind it. But I think Dr. Mulligan wants to also add and say a few things about that.
I agree with you, Doc, and Jason. Our history, meaning, I guess, Black history, is routinely denied and also rewritten just to make people feel more comfortable. Experience with learning about Juneteenth, I don't think I ever once heard one time the word Juneteenth used throughout my 12 years of schooling, ever. I think the first time I heard it was probably junior year in college, and it was just brushed over. It was not even really explained very well. Like Jason said, I mean, it just, anything having to do with race makes people very uncomfortable, and people don't want to talk about it. I'm happy that we have, this is a federal holiday that will now be observed, but I hope it just doesn't become a day off or just a day where people are just having parties. I hope that there's some true education that gets tied into Juneteenth within the schools. It's a tough time of year to really do this. It is June, we're almost out of school, so it will be some thoughtful planning to make sure that this is highlighted in the beginning of June, so kids have a good understanding of this as the years go on.
Thank you, Dr. Mulligan. Anybody else would like to weigh in?
I would also like to add, I was kind of thinking of when you brought this question, I was thinking of our federal system, and because our federal system consists of like majority of white men, I feel like they fail to realize or acknowledge that this kind of holiday, this event has kind of built the framework for our country, and I feel like that in itself is where the error lies, because if we have people with authority and power dictating our laws and the future of our country, we also have them kind of like that also ties in with like our school systems and how our school systems are teaching students in history classes about important events like Juneteenth.
That brings up a really good point because the whole idea of authority and power plays right into this.
Right.
Because our country has a history of papering over and glossing over things that are unpleasant that they don't want to be spoken about. And so just think about how this holiday became recognized. It came during a time of very, very substantial protests and a racial reckoning.
Yeah.
And it wasn't going away, So a lot of times when these things happen, so you kind of wait for it to die down. You kind of wait for it to fade away, and then you kind of move on with business as usual. In this particular instance, it was sustained to the point where we couldn't quite ignore it. And so I think that's where the kind of the impetus for change happened a lot more than in other instances. So, but it kind of goes to show you if you want, some things to change, you can't let up. You have to keep pressing, and even then, you're going to have a fight on your hands.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, I'm glad you named that because that's what I'm sitting here circulating and thinking about. We didn't just, have an epiphany and decide because Biden was in office that we're going to declare this a holiday. There was an obvious, you call it a reckoning. Ayanna Pressley describes it as an awakening because really it is that. People are awakening to the fact that we have these dirty truths or secrets in our history that are coming out. And as a nation, we had to take a stance. We had to make a move or a decision to show symbolically where we stand. And so that's great. And unfortunately, in doing this work of fighting for social justice, you have to actually leverage these times of turmoil and this sense of urgency. We have to leverage that. This is really unfortunate to have to say that, but that's the truth. So now that we've declared the holiday, I'm with Dr. Mulligan. What's to come after, right? What do we do on the education side so that when we're celebrating, we understand what it is that we're celebrating and not just having a day off or, enjoying the barbecue.
Yeah.
And I would implore, following what you just said, people to not have just a day off, but a day on, like a day of action.
Yeah.
Because this is not the first time that this has been celebrated, right? This is the first time it's been celebrated on a national level, at the federal level, but there are people and communities who have acknowledged this for as long as they've had family history, right?
Yep.
So it is novel for certain people, and I think it's important that we name that it is new for a segment of the population.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for another segment of the population, this is, I don't want to say old hat, but this has been done before.
Correct.
So it didn't require necessarily a reawakening, a reckoning to recognize lived truth.
So true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So true. So that leads us to the next question, which is how can we continue to push our system to include Juneteenth in our curriculum and promote meaningful conversations about this day and its meaning to our young people?
I can start off this question. I think it starts off with our books in the curriculum. These books set the foundations for a student's education, their knowledge about history, whether it's beginning from our kindergarten class to really a lot of the that we're getting our knowledge from historically are from books, textbooks. So if we have books that kind of not spread light, but kind of acknowledge what's going on, what happened at Juneteenth and other historical events within slavery and that period of era, I think it would really help a lot of students understand what was going on within history 100 years back. And when I grew up, I never really heard about Juneteenth. I heard about slavery, but I didn't really hear about that specific event. So it would be nice to kind of introduce specific books about Juneteenth into our curriculum, into younger grades, from in elementary school, really.
All right, that's great. That's a great perspective from a student that wants to diversify our curriculum and instruction, make sure that textbooks will reflect, Juneteenth and the experiences of African Americans and other diverse groups. Anybody else?
Can I add on something?
Sure.
As a collective whole in society, if we continue to create and attend groups like the district team and more focus groups on specific issues, and do political advocacy through protests and even raising awareness, as well as organizing local events and reaching out to organizations, I believe that we could improve equity, starting with our communities to reach out for a call to action in the world. The thing is that social awareness in social media is seen as a trend to young adults, and this is where the conflict comes into play, because issues aren't, like, we can't really resolve issues if people are just stopping the fight for change, when it's not seen as trending to like young adults.
Thank you. That was a great addition to what your Anna. I always confuse the two names. You are sisters, but that was a good addition to it. Anybody else?
I mean, I think consistency is key, right? The normalizing of having these conversations, exploring and using different mediums. We have textbooks, you have a lot of different ways to teach. It doesn't always have to just be in a textbook. My biggest thing coming from the city's perspective is that we are creating spaces and opportunities for learning, engagement, edutainment, if you will, throughout the year, right? It's really easy to follow the themes of the holidays of the month, but how are we connecting from Black History Month to Juneteenth all the way around? And that this month would be a way to, elevate what we've been doing throughout the year. I think that's the important thing. It's always, trying to play on the themes. I think of it similarly when you think about pride, and the education needed around that, because these are heavy, complex topics, and there's work that needs to be done at all levels, at the individual level, the people who are around you that you influence, and of course the systems that govern our society.
Interesting. That's no doubt about it. It sounds like this requires a long-term systemic change, but it needs to be done obviously systematically to make sure that, and consistently to ensure that it doesn't die, because people are the true authors that really can take this work forward and continue to do it. So that, with that being said, that certainly leads us to another question that's kind of interrelated, which has to do with Juneteenth moving from just a holiday or building on the momentum that we have to a call to action. Some of the things that you already have said, but sometimes we tend to use holidays, celebrations, just a one-day thing, when in fact that our action should be deeper, with done in a way that shows results rather than building on theory and small celebrations here and there. Real concrete action-oriented strategies that will lead to results. Anybody would like to comment on that?
So I want to echo Jason's pretty statement about he referenced the day on. So that's something that was just associated with Martin Luther King holiday. So I went to school in Atlanta, and during that time, you had a really big push, because that was, the birthplace of Martin Luther King, that it's not a day off. You go out and you enact some sort of service, you go out and do something to better your community, to kind of honor Dr. King's legacy.
Yeah.
Having it be an active day where we do things, of course we're going to have a celebration, because that's important. It's important to celebrate and get some good barbecue going and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But before that, I think thinking about how we can connect that day to something larger, be it a movement, be it some sort of service, be it some sort of some sort of conversation where we have discussions and we talk to our friends, our families about some aspect of justice and equality, maybe connected to some sort of larger social justice movement, or use that day to really kind of think and deliberate, or to take some action around some aspect of social justice would perhaps be a good way to make it a holiday where you do something and it has a real meaning beyond the kind of the celebratory things that are really important as well.
Right.
Then you go home and you cook, and then you barbecue.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have the two things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think that educators can play a role in taking it amongst themselves to make sure their students feel appreciated and like their ancestors' legacies are being honored and what they fought for and strived for.
That's so important. Thank you for saying that.
I agree with Percy and the student who just spoke. I do think I think it's important for us to recognize that there's going to be opposition, though. There's always going to be opposition when we're talking about anything race-related. There's a lot of people that like to fall back on the easy, well, that wasn't me, that wasn't my family, we didn't have slaves. And I think it's okay to lean into the discomfort of the conversation, because if you're never willing to get a little uncomfortable, then there will be no progress. I think Percy said it before, or maybe it was Dr. Barros, how there was just no let up after George Floyd, and the same thing has to happen with Juneteenth. Like, we just can't let up. So it just doesn't become just a day off. I never think the kids ever have a problem grasping new information or leaning in. It's the adults, I really believe, that need to do a lot more of the work, because the kids are sponges. That's why they're in school, is to learn, and it's our job to do the work for them so they can take it and run. And I feel like the young adults were a great example through the last few years with the social justice movement. More than anybody, they really led the charge. And if we give them all the tools and the resources, I think that they can lead the charge again with Juneteenth.
Thanks for that, Dr. Mulligan. Anybody else would like to weigh in?
Yeah, I just want to stress education, 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 right? But that's how we're going to continue to progress forward. And, as we're sitting here talking and folks are listening at home, they're wondering, what can I do? I don't run the government. I don't run a system, or I don't have that position of power. And the power actually lies in you as the individual, right? And taking that day on, we're going to keep repeating that because that's what it is. And you know what? Everybody loves a day off. Let's not, act like we all probably need a day off, right? But in that day off, you being on could be as simply as reading a book, watching a documentary, but just doing something intentionally that helps you learn. If it's not about Juneteenth, maybe it's about the Tulsa Massacre and, Black Wall Street and that existence. But there's ways to do that work, especially depending on your lived experience and what you have as truths in your own sort of perspective. There's different ways to help deepen and just know that regardless of your lived experience, there's always new information to learn. Because I think the key is that no matter who crosses your path or engages with you, that you're able to effectively engage within and across difference. I say that often, but that being able to do that takes concerted effort and intentionality in that individual work. Because when you get to a position when you have the power and the ability to create systematic change, you have the awareness and the knowledge to make impactful change. So everybody can do something. You don't have to, move a mountain. You could just at least start having some self-development in this area.
It certainly wrestles with the individuals and also with people collectively to really, make change happen.
Yeah.
So you take a concerted effort to do it. That leads us to another question, which is, as society, what can we do to ensure equal treatment for everyone without bias? The theme of bias and implicit bias, explicit bias has been widely discussed now in our society, in our schools. Everyone wants to do anti-racist work. Everyone wants to really move the systems and transform systems, certainly. But while progress has been made, we're not there yet. Much work remains to be done. So let's talk a little bit about this topic of treating people with dignity, respect, and also without bias. Everyone has bias, one way or the other. I acknowledge my bias. Like any other person has bias. You know, we're all different. We are unique. We have, different, identities and things like that, experiences in life. So let's talk a little bit what we can do as a society to really increase that, level of awareness that really, we need to live and treat each other more fairly and with more racial justice and so on and so forth. Let's talk about it. Anyone can take on it. It's a huge question, no doubt. There's a lot of layers to it, a lot of things, very complex. There's a lot of things to unpack, but this is education. We're supposed to.
I didn't know we were going to cure the world's ills today, but let's do it. I think that Dr. Barros brings up a good point in talking about it's about the individual at that level.
Right.
So what I would say is, first things first, reflect. Take a look at oneself, right? As you mentioned, we're all special, unique individuals, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, the old adage, just treat people how you'd like to be treated. But understanding that because we all have our own implicit biases and hopefully we don't make them explicit and affect other people in that way, consider that just for yourself. That's what I try to do in my practice, whether it's my teaching practice, my lived experience, et cetera, et cetera. But bigger than that, I think it is finding ourselves with like-minded individuals and coming together so that this movement that we're talking about, this work that we're talking about, it's not alone. You're not doing this solo work. You're not an individual out here. You are working in a collective so that we can then talk about a lot of these difficult issues, right? Whether we're talking about racial injustice, sexism, gender bias, et cetera, et cetera. The list can go on and on.
Right.
But if you don't take the time to be reflective first, and then find yourself with other like-minded individuals who are helping to make progress and push the movement forward, you're probably not doing the work the best way possible.
Thanks, Jason. That's powerful. Yeah. Anybody else?
I would say, one, I would echo the idea of one, acknowledging that you have unconscious bias and recognizing that it's okay, everybody's got it, and two, I think is important, especially in our current context, is when you listen to someone's lived experience, don't discount it because you haven't experienced that, because, when you hear about the story about, someone saying they've been discriminated against or they have experienced unfair treatment, don't go to yourself as the reference point of why that is or is not valid, So because their experience is much different than yours, your background, everything about you, your whole milieu influences where you are today. And that is completely different from someone else's. And so you need to recognize that and be able to listen and try to understand and empathize before discounting what they've gone through, and then forming an opinion about it.
So true. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Anybody else? Anyone else?
I'd love to harp on this notion of bias because acknowledging your bias is not enough.
Certainly.
Right? That becomes a common knowledge that we all have bias, but to live in the awareness of your bias is where we need to get people to. And that takes reflection, as you named. It takes sort of taking an inventory of what has shaped your attitudes, beliefs, your values, right? The cycle of socialization is real. And a lot of people don't even hear this term. So if this is the first time you're hearing cycle of socialization, I really encourage you to Google that and learn a little bit more about it so you understand how your unconscious beliefs are developed, and that if you do not become aware and then actively address, it will remain unconscious, right? And it does actually affect how you engage, the beliefs you have, the thoughts. That's where the prejudice, discrimination, and all those other terms come into play because of the bias. So that's such a critical part of doing the work. That's part of something you can do when you're on your day off. And then equal. So bias stood out to me in this question, and equal, right? I think when we're talking about equal, we also have to consider the difference of equity, right? So we're standing in the gaps of the legacies of an oppressive system that continues to manifest today. Can we really ensure equal and fair treatment if we're trying to close that gap? I think eventually that's where we're trying to get to, right? We're aiming for inclusive excellence, and we're looking for folks to have equal opportunity. But in order to get to equal opportunity for all, measures of equity, right? Practices of equity have to be in place that sometimes look and feel unfair. So those are two things I do want to sort of name in thinking about this question, because in order for us to ensure equal treatment without bias, I mean, bias is always there. So it's about what's the intentionality and the consistency of your self-awareness around bias.
Anything else? Interesting perspectives. Very good. All right. So my next question is, has to do with our effort as a society to overcome the challenges that we still face with regard to racial justice, and what we can do as individuals, collectively, as a nation, to help our children and the next generation understand, respect, and aim for a more equitable society. Obviously, another complex question that will depend on many facets, many factors outside our control. But I tend to believe that each one of us, at our own level of leadership, level of influence, we can make small changes or incremental changes that, when added, will certainly bring significant results for our society. So I welcome you to comment on that question. Anyone?
I'd love to hear from one of the students. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I think I'm just, for this question, I'm only talking to the people of color. I think a lot of self-care has to happen right now as well. I think we are always in this fight, and oftentimes we're not taking care of ourselves through all of the trauma that we are experiencing through microaggressions, macroaggressions. It's happening daily to us, and it makes it difficult to keep pushing on and keep putting the effort in and keep encouraging other people to put effort for change. So, I mean, I would just say that we need to take care of ourselves as well. We need to take care of ourselves first, ourselves, our families, our children, because this is a struggle that really never ends for us. So I think that's really important.
That's so true.
Yeah.
A person's action actually will show results if the person upon whom the action is falling feels secure, feels healthy, and obviously that's something that cannot be discounted. I fully agree with you. Anyone else would like to comment?
I think that as a society, we don't have to ignore skin color, ethnicity, or race. That's not the issue. We have to instead find light in the diversity that we thankfully have within our schools. And I also think that if we represent everyone and we make sure everyone has a spotlight in our education, then we can maybe move past the fact that there really is certain bias towards races.
Yeah. Good perspective. Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody else?
I would say Dr. Mulligan named it in her previous remarks that it's the adults.
Yeah.
It's us, right? We always talk about the children of our future, and that they're the ones who are going to make the change. But we're the teachers, we're the educators, we're the models. So first, we didn't have the chance to have the type of education we're creating for them today. So it's okay to humble ourselves and say, wow, I'm 55, I never heard about the cycle of socialization, right? And taking the time to do that work is so critical. And I love that Dr. Mulligan named the self-care for people of color, BIPOC individuals. I think it's also a call for our white allies and just people of the dominant identity to take ownership, right? And we didn't create it. We weren't the ones responsible, but it was human beings who created and set these terms and these systems. So we as humans can dismantle, right, and rebuild towards inclusive excellence, the beautiful, statement that you shared of what we're trying to get to. But we have to own that.
I always say that this work cannot be done without the authentic participation of our white allies. It cannot be done. It's not just saying, yes, we're going to support you, but action speaks louder than, words. And this needs to be done, which leads to our last question, which has to do with what are we expecting for our white allies in terms of helping us, help the society in general? Because this is for the good of our diverse society, diverse country. Dismantle the impact of racism, discrimination, oppression, and the whole white supremacy in our communities and our day-to-day action. So anybody would like to comment on that?
I'll go.
I was going to say, Jason, this is your chance.
I'll go. I think that in light of the discussion we've been having, the focus, and you just named it right here, was the humanity, right? So if we think about what transatlantic chattel slavery was, it was the dehumanization of people based on melanin content and country of origin. And so as people got free, they didn't find out till it was much later. Took years for them to find out that they were actually free. Now, what does that freedom mean? How does one celebrate freedom? Right now, as we think about expectations many years off, the focus is on all of our humanity, our collective humanity. And I think that when we begin to think about what that looks like and what that means, it means gotta be accountable for historically what has happened. Black history is American history. Blacks have been at the beginning and the establishment of this country, and many of the institutions that we utilize, enjoy, try to dismantle, try to rebuild, try to restructure. We've been here for all of that.
No doubt.
So, what does that look like? It looks like being a human. Hopefully we can get some good humans, regardless of skin color, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity. But it is about humanity. And if you cannot see the humanity in somebody else, we might have bigger issues to deal with.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And this isn't just a racial issue and challenge, right? We also have to acknowledge the wealth or lack thereof, right? In the humanity of it all. So there were deliberate actions and still policies or what have you in place to keep Black people, BIPOC individuals from growing wealth. And so we know that in the hierarchy of white supremacy, it's not just about race, but also intersectional with wealth and resources. So I want to name that too, that when it comes to dismantling and change, it's not just, and I'm not saying just to downplay, because that's, the racial piece is obviously a critical and heavy piece, but the wealth component is another way to keep that order, if you will, in the society.
So I would say, I want to second you about the wealth issue. It is major, and it is probably the most enduring impact of all of it. But I would also say, too, when you think about allies, I think one of the things, two things. One is you see something, you say something. So I'm sure that, you know, a lot of white people go into all white spaces and they hear casual racism from time to time. And because it's an uncle or a cousin or a friend or someone in your social circle, you kind of like ignore it, you think something about it, but you kind of move on from it. So maybe thinking about, you know, taking that time to say, you know what, that's not okay. That was wrong what you said. That was racist. So having the courage to kind of call out those instances or call in when necessary. So I think that's one thing that we can do, a small thing. And two is also thinking about being mindful of your zone of influence. So everybody has a zone of influence, a space where they can have an impact on others. For some, it may extend to your household, it may extend to your workplace with a certain group of people. Some people it's much bigger. You know, I'm a principal of a school, so my zone of influence is larger. But if you're the mayor, or if you're a politician, or you're an activist, or something like that, you have varying degrees of influence. And so, like, kind of be mindful of what your zone of influence is, and be purposeful in using that zone of influence for advocating for equity and change for all people.
And hearing you say that makes me think about white allies who are in the spaces, who are challenging, you know, people and things that they're seeing around them. And it's connecting me to Dr. Mulligan's notion of self-care, that I think the white allies need to, you know, join forces. They need to have spaces of supports for each other so that they too can get that self-care and that sort of camaraderie and support as you're going through it, because it's hard. It's hard to go against
the establishment.
Exactly. And so that, I think that helps us go away from the color lines and speaks us back to humanity. So it's not easy. We're creating those spaces as individuals of color who've been living and working through this every day, waking up Black, right? But if you're a white ally, you're anti-racist and active in that work, find your support system as well, because you might be the one voice among your group and you want to keep, you know, that fire burning.
That leads us to poetry recitation. We will have students with us. They have their poems prepared just to highlight the, you know, Juneteenth. To ensure that they have can bring this conversation a little bit more bring a little bit more, make it a little bit more joyful, and when you certainly hear what our students have to say, it's what we tend to always try to, you know, feel encouraged by their voices and perspectives. So they put some poems together, right? They're gonna recite those for us. Let's start.
If you should go. Love, leave me like the light, the gently passing day we would not know but for the night when it has slipped away. So many hopes have fled, have left me but the name of what they were when love is dead. Go to be loved the same, go quietly a dream, when done should leave no trace, that it has lived except a gleam across the dreamer's face.
Thank you so much. That was powerful. Thank you.
I can go next.
Okay.
Okay. So, Juneteenth's a celebration of Liberation Day. When the word of emancipation reached Texas slaves, they say, in sorrow were we brought here to till a harvest land. We lived and died and fought here, till freedom was at hand. They tore apart our families, they stole life's nascent breath, turned women into mammies, and worked our men to death. They shamed the very nation which fostered freedom's birth. It died on the plantation, denying man his worth. But greed and misplaced honor brought crisis to a head, and justice fell upon her, the weight of Union dead. They fought to save a nation, and yet they saved its soul from moral condemnation and made the country whole.
Thank you. That was very nice.
I guess I'm the last one, but I'm reading a poem, We Rose by Christina K. From Africa's heart we rose. Already a people, our faces bond, our bodies lean, we rose. Skills of art, life, beauty, and family, crushed by forces we knew nothing of, we rose. Survive we must, we did, we rose. We rose to be you, we rose to be me. Above everything expected, we rose. To become the knowledge we never knew, we rose. Dream we did, act we must.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
We rose, we did.
I also wanted to add that yes, our country was founded on selfish intentions, and so some people, I wrote this down because it was just like a thing that I really wanted to say. And so some people don't feel the need to change that isn't directly related to them. It was formed on the basis of life, liberty, and happiness, but throughout history, this foundation was a favor for the white man. Issues are not being taken as seriously as they need to be, but how can we make people realize that this issue needs to be taken to create this push for change? And that is the everlasting question that we all need to address.
Wow. Very powerful, Leena. Very good. Well done. Okay, so it sounds that the students have recited their poems, and I want to thank everyone, and I hope that the wisdom and the perspectives shared by our panelists have improved our understanding of the significance of Juneteenth for our country, especially the struggles and the sacrifices that the enslaved African Americans and their descendants have endured along the way to get us where we are today. I equally hope that both individually and collectively, we will continue to promote it not only for African Americans and their descendants, but also for all those who continue to fight for equity, social justice, and inclusion. Lastly, I'd like to thank Revere TV for hosting us and our distinguished panelists for the meaningful contribution to this discussion. Thank you all.